Jens, you wrote on your new newsletter, which I recommend everyone to check out, that this is it's a myth out there that there is a connection between money aggregates and inflation. Why does this myth, in your view, refuse to die?
Well, it's been in the textbooks for decades, and you can just go and Google it. If you Google money supply and inflation, you'll get like almost all the top hits will be like, if there's some kind of mathematical certainty that money supply is gonna translate into inflation in a simple way. It's just not that simple, and we've had very strong evidence of that over the last decade, where different central banks have experimented more or less aggressively with money printing, and we've had very, very little inflation. So it takes time for this myth to die, but that's why we started this blog. Most of our content is behind a paywall and has been secret, and now we wanted to do a blog. We call it Money Inside and Out, where we go into some of this policy debate for a big audience. And this was one of the first ones we wanted to put out there. And maybe next year will be different, but the last 10 years have been pretty clear.
Jens, you hope to spark debate through this blog. Did you get any answers or any fight back to your perspective that caught your attention that you thought, oh, that has credence to it?
Well, so we definitely got a lot of commenting. So we'll have to we'll have to decide what we do with the comment section, because we have to answer all the comments. We'll be very busy the whole day. I think the situation we have looking into 2001 is one where we have a combination of both monetary and fiscal policies. So really what's different now is that, as opposed to the situation right after the global financial crisis, where monetary policy was kind of alone, there's much more realization now that fiscal policy will have to do more of the heavy lifting, and it'll be the complement of fiscal monetary policy together that can potentially generate something new. And I think even the debate we're having this week about, are we going to have 900 billion of fiscal stimulus in the U.S. as a top-up, or 700 billion? Those amounts, if we compare to the amounts that were discussed after the global financial crisis, are actually pretty big amounts, and especially on top of a previous stimulus, right? So we're just having a new mindset on fiscal, and it would be that combination of just persistently aggressive fiscal stimulus and a Fed that is saying, okay, we're not going to do anything preemptively. That is what has a chance of generating inflation in a different way from essentially monetary policy alone.
Yeah, I don't mean to split hairs, but I do wonder, Jens, if there is sort of a distinction here between, I guess, the type of stimulus, or whatever you want to call it, whatever the Fed did, that quantitative easing, versus more fiscal type of stimulus. I mean, you have the idea of printing money, but what the Fed had effectively done back during the financial crisis and even up to today is really not printing money as much as it is simply just kind of facilitating, the rotation of assets, more or less.
Well, so I think the key distinction is what I would call an asset swap QE, right? Where the Fed buys a bunch of bonds and it injects some bank reserves into the system, and it's that asset swap that doesn't really impact the real economy that much. But if we have a situation where the Fed is buying bonds and the government goes and actually spends that extra cash either in the form of infrastructure or giving it to households that are going to spend it, it's a totally different impact on the economy. So that's the big difference. There's also a big debate about, okay, is it just asset price inflation or whatever it is? But ultimately, the sort of most important part of inflation for the average consumer is obviously what the consumer goods basket is doing. And that has not been moving very much so far. But if there is really a demand impact of the overall policy setup, it could be different. So I'm not saying, we're going to have massive hyperinflation next year. I'm not saying there's a simple relationship between money supply. What I'm saying is that actually this type of policy constellation that you have now has a chance of generating inflation over time. And obviously market participants need to be very careful, because it's absolutely not priced, right? So it's always surprising stuff that can really move markets.
Jens, you said earlier that one of the key differences, or what could drive inflation, would be persistently stimulative fiscal policy. Of course, we're finding out, getting details on a possible stimulus right now. We don't know if it's going to go anywhere. but it's also a one-off, 700 billion, 900 billion. It's a lot of money, and then presumably we sort of go back to fiscal policy as normal. Does a one-off do it, or would it really have to be a meaningful change in how we approach fiscal policy to actually get a change in the inflation trajectory?
I think that persistence is very, very key. And I think you will find that a lot of the key economic voices within the new Biden administration sort of have learned the lesson from the post-global financial crisis period, in that you don't want to take back the stimulus too early. Right. This is a key lesson. We are seeing it in Europe as well, right? In Europe, they're sort of famous for having a tight fiscal framework within the Maastricht Treaty. The Maastricht Treaty is disabled in Europe officially. You don't have to obey the fiscal rules this year and next year either. So they want to generate some persistency in the fiscal stimulus there. So it's part of this framework where fiscal policy is getting more emphasis, and rightly so. And I think you're absolutely right to point out to the consistency. And I would point out that in the U.S., this sort of lame duck stimulus is important to give the economy momentum, but it's not viewed as the last bit, right? So we have a new administration coming in, right, and presumably they'll be very aggressive, like infrastructure is a big thing. That's going to come online later on.